This is the capital of capitalism, now run by someone who's self-described as a socialist. And I think it's going to perhaps change the face of what the city looks like. I think there's a big question around the businesses and whether they stay. There's questions about whether the wealthy stay. There's questions, therefore, about the tax base. I think there's questions about policing and safety in the city. There's a question about a generational schism between the young generation and the older generation. There's questions about housing. So the next 4 years are going to be fascinating.
It sounds as if this huge sort of tidal wave of youthful optimism around the Mamdani campaign is going to hit the breaker of reality very quickly.
I imagine it will. There's lots of promises that the mayor-elect has made around taxes, around free busing, around real estate and rent controls and the like. And some of those things he can actually implement on his own, but a lot of them require votes from other parts of the state of New York, and it is unlikely he will get them. But the rhetoric unto itself may tip the balance in terms of just the perception of New York City.
Do you think that the rich, to put it very simply, are going to leave?
I think they're going to wait and see. I've been shocked at how mobile the wealthy Americans really are. You know, 10 years ago, I never believed that people would just get up and leave. But now they have private planes, and there are so many flights back and forth to Florida. People now have an app in New York to count the days that they're physically there so that they can avoid paying taxes if they can actually stay out of New York for more than 183 days a year. That is, the wealthy have an app for this.
So when people talk about a wealth tax, maybe that's a kind of tax that belongs to history, not to now.
Well, I don't know if the wealth tax unto itself is actually, A, going to be implemented, but B, is even the issue. The larger issue, which doesn't get discussed enough, is that Mamdani has effectively proposed, though he may not get it, a much higher corporate tax. And so you have a lot of businesses in New York, obviously, that would be impacted by that corporate tax. And again, it goes back to how many people you're going to employ in New York. If you were thinking about staying in New York, would you move? If you were thinking about coming to New York, would you go somewhere else? These are the questions that I think we're going to see play out over the next year or two.
You sound to me as if you are at least queasy or uneasy about what's ahead.
I'm uneasy. Look, this campaign and this election, among the Democrats, the Democratic side, were a number of flawed candidates across the board. The current mayor, flawed candidate. He got engaged in this, criminal suit and then settled with the president. And so people thought that he was under his thumb. Andrew Cuomo, who was our governor, got pushed out over allegations of womanizing and the like. And then you have this young man who's, by the way, a brilliant politician in all, by no question. Yet his ideas are, at least for this city, considered quite radical. And so the question is this an idiosyncratic moment, given that these other candidates were so flawed, people chose him, or does this mean something even larger, not just about New York, but about capitalism, socialism around the United States?
Meanwhile, we've got kind of gusts of smoke and lava emanating from another New Yorker, Donald Trump, as a result of all of this. If Trump goes fully to war with New York because of this election, what does it mean? How much leverage does the president have?
Oh, goodness. He has lots of leverage. He has lots of leverage over funding to the city. He has lots of leverage over whether he sends the National Guard into the city. He has lots of leverage over how he pursues immigration. Some of these immigration policing, this ICE group, which we have not seen, really running around New York the way we have in other cities. So I think there's a lot of presence. You could potentially feel the wrath of President Trump in New York in a real way. And the mayor will have very little latitude to prevent that.
And on the other side of the spectrum with the Democrats, there's been a lot of head-scratching here about whether this is the beginning of a real shift to the left in response to the populist right and the pendulum going all over the way. Or do you think that mainstream Democrats are going to look at New York very warily and think, we're not going there?
I think it's going to be a combination of both. If you looked at the election last night, there were some other important races, California, Virginia, New Jersey, and there were some moderates involved.
Moderate Democrats who did well.
And so the question is whether the Democrats broadly are going to look at the moderates and say, we're going that direction, whether we'll go fully left, or whether it becomes a sort of large tent, in which case you have, all sorts of different perspectives.
One final area I'd like to talk about is policing. Law and order on the streets, always an issue in New York, always has been. In the past, Mamdani has talked about defunding the police and the New York police being racist and homophobic. He has dropped that rhetoric. How much do you think he can be trusted to keep New York relatively safe?
I think that's the big question. He has said that he will reappoint Commissioner Tisch, who's the current commissioner, who's been doing actually quite a good job given the circumstances. The safety profile of the city has gotten materially better over the past couple of years. It is unclear whether she would stay in this role if she doesn't have the autonomy to avoid, for example, defunding the police or even reallocating resources. And so I think there's going to be a big test. In 6 months from now, will the mayor come to her and say, excuse me, I want to do it this way, in which case she may say, we're not doing it this way and I'm leaving.
It'll be really interesting to watch. Andrew, since you are here, you've got a big book out about the 1929 crash. And again, a lot of people are looking at what's going on in the dot-com bubble and what's going on with AI stock prices and wondering uneasily whether we're heading towards something relatively similar. What's your view?
Look, I think there are remarkable parallels between the 1920s and 1929 with what's happening now. By the way, there was an influx of people coming to New York. People were excited about coming to New York. By the way, today, they're going the opposite direction. They're going to Texas and Florida and all sorts of other places. But as to a crash, I think it's fair to say, overheated as it relates to artificial intelligence and the real question and how much spending and indiscriminate spending is taking place. And the question is, do we have a hiccup along the way, a correction in the markets, or do we have something much worse? I don't think that we're going to necessarily land in the Great Depression, but it would be shocking to me if we didn't have a crash of some sort that maybe looks a little bit more like 1999 than 1929.